Well, welcome and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name's Jack Whitaker. I'm a member of the Corporate Mental Health Alliance of Australia Early in Careers Committee from the Commonwealth Bank, and I'll be your host for the second Thriving from the Start event for 2026. You might also see Patrick supporting behind the scenes on the chat. Pat's also an EIC member at Microsoft, and he'll be running our chat interactions today and the Q&A, wrangling all that and the fun stuff that comes with it throughout. So big thank you to you, Pat. For those of us who are joining for the first time, Thriving from the Start is an initiative the Early in Careers Committee created, sitting within the Corporate Mental Health Alliance of Australia. It's a business-led, non-profit organisation focused on creating mentally healthy businesses. Thriving from the Start exists to support early career professionals to connect, learn, and grow together. Now, a quick note for those of you who may be expecting a webinar on Burnout 101, today's session is certainly not that. In July last year, we ran a foundational session with Dr. Don Chan and Rebecca Hoffman. That session covered what burnout is, its warning signs, and the general strategies that you can implement to support yourself. Pat's included the link to this webinar in the chat, and if anyone wants to view it today, you're welcome to do so. However, today, what we're going to do is we're going to take things a little bit more specifically in terms of managing the symptoms of burnout and the signs of burnout. Now, CMHAA research recently found that 53% of early in career employees reported burnout compared to 46% across the broader workforce. What's more, additional focus group research found that every focus group participant reported structural factors that could contribute to long-term burnout as well. In other words, even if early in careers are not universally experiencing burnout just yet, they're very much acutely aware of the early warning signs. Now, many early in career employees also recognised that protecting their well-being and working more sustainably requires developing the skills needed to navigate a complex workplace environments, which often include setting things like boundaries, managing ambiguity, and seeking clarity really early on in your career. We know that one focus group participant stated younger people are more prone to burnout. They haven't learned the skills or how to set boundaries or even how to say no. You always feel like you need to prove yourself and your spot in the role, and this couldn't be more prevalent than early in your career. The question we therefore want to sit with today is not simply what burnout is, it's why early in careers are more at risk of burnout and what skills and capabilities they need to develop so they can navigate the workplace and ultimately thrive in the workplace. Today, we're going to explore three main threads that came out loud and clear in the research. The first one being ambiguity as a stressor. The second, perfectionism as a learned behaviour. And the third, feedback sensitivity and growth. And today we're very lucky to have two speakers who bring genuinely different experiences and very complementary perspectives. Now, Pat's also going to drop a few prompts in the chat along the way, and we'd really please encourage you guys to engage, participate, share your reactions, your one-liners, your questions as you go. And throughout this session, we will keep that monitored and circle back to it later on. Now, as you can probably see, we've got two lovely guests with us today. Joining us are Penny Myerscough, who's the Chief Mental Health Officer at CBA, along with me, and Zainab Nayyar, who's the Inclusion and Wellbeing Specialist at Mallesons. Penny and Zainab, welcome. Now, rather than a formal intro today, which is what we would usually do, we're going to do something a little bit different called a Fast Five. So Penny, Zainab, no pressure here, but we're going to ask you 5 rapid questions. We want one-line answers, no overthinking. Penny will get you to go first and then Zainab straight after. So first question for today for you, Penny. Coffee, tea, or something else to start the day for you?
Love a coffee so much, but I'm a water first thing in the morning.
I can attest to the coffee first thing in the morning, Penny. And Zainab?
I wish my answer was as healthy as Penny, but first thing is a cup of tea.
Beautiful. Good to hear it. Now, Penny, second question. What's the best wellbeing hack you swear by in 5 words or less?
It's got to be locking in that decent amount of sleep.
Perfect.
Sleep is gold.
Perfect. Good to hear it. And Zainab?
Getting outside. Very important, especially, when we're working from office or home, whenever you feel like you need that break, you need to get outside, get in that fresh air.
Couldn't agree more, especially after a hard day. Penny, what's one word that describes your first year of work?
Disillusioned.
I'm not going to go into that any further. We'll move to Zainab. What about you?
Confusing.
Interesting. Common theme there. Penny, what's something you wish somebody had told you in your first year in the workforce?
that all the things that are challenging are actually an investment and they will bear fruit.
Good to hear it. And Zainab?
You can say no to things.
Lovely, lovely. Penny, burnout, is it happening more, or do you think we're just naming it more?
Big question. Needs more than one sentence. I think both.
Absolutely. And hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about that soon. Zainab?
Yeah, I would agree with Penny. I think it's a bit of both, but yeah, definitely happy about the fact that we're talking about it more.
Awesome, awesome. And again, we thank you both for your time today. I'm looking forward to it. I know everyone on the call is as well. Now let's dive straight into things. So the first theme we're going to talk through today is ambiguity as a stressor. And one of the most consistent things we hear from early in careers is that the ambiguity at work can feel very overwhelming. And I think from hearing from both of you already, it's been your experience early on in your careers too. We know experienced workers tend to read ambiguity as this will become clearer over time. But for early in careers, it can be very unclear tasks that require heavy, deliberate thinking. And often that ambiguity is read as, I must be missing something here. So that's where we want to start today. Penny, first question for you. You've worked across multiple generations of corporate Australia. What's distinctly different about how today's early in career professionals experience ambiguity at work compared to those entering, say, 10 or 20 years ago? And what do you think's been the consistent theme throughout that?
Look, it's such an interesting question, Jack, and I think there are both unique circumstances for now, but also some common threads that are going through. I think, the world of work right now is on a precipice of incredible change, often likened to another industrial revolution. So an incredible, exciting time, but my goodness, the rate and the pace of change is unprecedented. And I don't think it's going to go backwards or cease. So I think the world of work is looking very different to perhaps what early in careers might have seen from mentors that they were told about, what their parents have seen, undoubtedly. I think even the definition of what a job looks like and what skills look like and what's important is indeed changing. Now, that's really exciting. And I think for many people who are happy in uncertainty, this is a really exciting time. But for many, we like certainty. We don't love not quite knowing that we're feeling like we're on solid ground. And so I'll come back to that perhaps. But I think ambiguity in work, particularly early in career, has been around for a very long time. For many reasons. I think oftentimes when we start in graduate roles, we feel very ready. We feel very well equipped, and indeed, wow, you're super competent, and you've really mastered a lot of skills. But there's oftentimes a piece around work, particularly in a graduate role, is often very reactive. You often don't have control about what your day looks like, what gets done when and how. And that reactivity and lack of autonomy, we know really is a big impact into mental health. We know low autonomy, that is low control, is one of the biggest drivers to poor mental health. And so I think ambiguity in those roles where you don't have a lot of control definitely contributes.
Absolutely, Penny. If I reflect on my experience, you leave university and you think you know what you're doing, and within the first 6 months, you realise you've probably learnt more on the role than you did in your whole time at university, and that can be quite an unnerving and unsettling experience too. Absolutely. So, what do you think happens cognitively and emotionally to someone who goes through something like that, who goes from being in quite a controlled, under control environment into a really ambiguous environment in the workplace?
Well, I think that's right, and it's interesting, isn't it? I reflect in preparation for this on the extent to which our tertiary education systems and our education systems as a whole, do they set us up well for what this looks like? And I'm not really sure that they necessarily do. I think oftentimes at university, we have set assignments, they have a due date, we know what we need to do, we know what good looks like, we have a rubric that tells us this is what exceptional work is going to look like. And then we get into work and that's really hard. So cognitively, oftentimes what happens is we're stuck in uncertainty, and our brains aren't great at when we're undergoing change, when we're in uncertainty. We typically feel as though we've lost control. We feel as though we have reduced competence and confidence. Now, anyone on the call who's done sort of Psych 101 will know that our sense of self-efficacy, that is our sense that we have what is needed to actually get through this, is pretty much underpinned by confidence and competence. So oftentimes our sense of self-efficacy gets really undermined when we're in a new environment and we find ourselves in a place of ambiguity, and we don't quite know what good looks like. We don't know what's expected of us. We find ourselves very at sea. And so those things can really, particularly when we are people perhaps who are externally validated. So we look for strong self-assurance from other people, and all of a sudden it's not there in maybe the way it has previously. That can really lead to some difficulties with how we are evaluating ourselves.
Well said, Penny. I totally agree. And it's probably a good question for you, Zainab, given someone who's actually pivoted and probably changed the direction of your career. Reflecting on what Penny's just spoken to, can you walk us through, I guess, your own early career experience and how you navigated that ambiguity?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jack. Just for the audience, I've had a few interesting career pathway changes, but I started off as a lawyer. Yeah, early in my career as a lawyer, I think the reason when you asked me, I said confusion, because I think ambiguity showed up to me in ways I didn't recognize at the time. So in uni, studying law was highly structured, right? Clear processes, precedents, rules. But in practice, especially as a junior lawyer, there's a lot left unsaid. I wasn't always sure what good enough looked like, how long something should take, or whether I was meeting expectations unless something was wrong, right? So the ambiguity created this constant low-level pressure for me. I filled the gaps with overwork, staying late, rechecking everything, trying to anticipate every possible issue. I thought I was being really diligent, but really, I think I was just trying to manage uncertainty by controlling everything I could. I didn't want to mention here, I don't feel like it was the ambiguity that got me there. I feel like it was my response to it.
Fantastic. And as someone who's got 4 lawyers in my family, I can certainly attest to, I guess, some of the impacts of that type of career and the impact on you early in your career. I guess if you reflect back on that, Zainab, what do you think some skills and strategies that you upon reflection and maybe looking back into the future a little bit, how did you help navigate that scenario and I guess the way of thinking given the context of the legal environment?
Yeah, I think I really wish, everyone should do that. You should in every role, not just being in the law, that clarifying expectations really early, asking what does success look like, or even just like, I feel like that's a really over encompassing question. It's just like what level of detail is needed here. I think it's really important to time box your work, deciding upfront how much time something deserves, then letting it expand endlessly, which can especially happen when you're early in your career and might be doing a lot of tasks for the first time. And sharing your work, sharing early drafts of things, treating work as iterative instead of waiting until sharing it with your team or your supervisor until it feels perfect. I feel like that was, if I was to go back and I was like, yeah, those are some of the skills and strategies I have learned and now I put in my career, but I feel like putting them early in my career would have really helped me. Also, I feel like just normalize not knowing, be comfortable saying, I'm not sure. Can we talk through it? So, in hindsight, if I had used those strategies early in my career, I likely would have reduced my mental load of constantly guessing, avoided overworking tasks that honestly didn't need it, and I would have felt more supported instead of isolated. So it came for me, all of those feelings, less from the work itself and more from just carrying all of that uncertainty alone.
Absolutely, Zainab. And I really resonate with that. The one you mentioned about sharing tasks and seeking help and saying, I don't know. I think there's a lot of power in that. And I know for me, early in career, you've got that sense of wanting to prove yourself and show that
Mm.
you've earned the role, and you need to get the runs on the board to be able to demonstrate your value, which weighs a lot on people early in careers. So I appreciate you sharing your insight.
And
Penny,
I think it also jumps in, if I can just jump in, and thank
yeah,
you, Zainab, for sharing so generously with regard to your story. I think too, when you certainly for me, and I'm sure for many people, we know it's a competitive environment, and those of us who have worked hard to get, roles in with employers of choice, wow, that imposter syndrome has a big role to play, and that also contributes to not wanting to ask for help because you so want to prove that I deserve to be here, to prove to yourself more than anything else that I deserve this role, that voice in my head that tells me, oh, soon everyone's going to know that I don't know anything. They're all going to know I don't deserve to be here. All of that very normalized imposter syndrome really, I think, contributes and drives a lot of those behaviors that you discussed.
absolutely, Penny. I know for me, the reflection and I guess the aha moment is you realize everyone's been in this point at some stage before. No one's been immune to it, and we've all sort of gone along the journey, just at different stages.
I agree. One of the most impactful things I've seen in the last few years is the what used to be the Tristan Jepson Foundation, which is now called something else, which is a legal mental health foundation. I went to a talk there with a High Court judge and a panelist of really senior lawyers, and the topic was imposter syndrome, which was so powerful to see these senior, really, really skilled lawyers talk about how they all have experienced imposter syndrome. And I just think it's a really powerful thing when we bring it out into the light.
Absolutely. I think there's a real juxtaposition between perception and reality with that, isn't there?
Totally, totally.
I think that's a really good segue onto our next theme as well, which is about perfectionism as a learned behavior. And I think that's probably been the undercurrent of what we've spoken about so far. And look, I guess for most early in careers, we know that you've got 15 years of education where a lot of it is focused on
Mm,
individual output being the highest marks you can get. However, in corporate, there's no rubric or there's no comparison to that. We know that good enough is enough to move the team forward, and
mm,
that matters more than giving flawless, perfect work. We know that pouring infinite time into a task just creates bottlenecks and not necessarily better outcomes. But the muscle of polish is the only one a lot of the early in careers have trained. So one of the quotes we got from the CMWHA research says, a lot of my pressure to perform kind of my whole life, actually, that ideology of wanting to get the highest grade you get in school from a young age, what's then translated into the workforce, it isn't always helpful. So Zainab, I guess I'd love to hear
mm.
from you now from a legal perspective. Law is, as we know, famously a perfection-heavy profession. Billable hours, lots of drafting, often no margin for error, and long hours, like you mentioned before. How did this play out for you early in your career, and how did you experience to your experience of burnout?
Yeah, no, thanks so much. I think, there's this implicit message in the law, and I would actually even say that in most legal services professions, that,
Mm,
errors matter, precision is everything,
mm,
and your work reflects directly on your capability. This is what I went in. And as someone early in their career, I internalized this as if it's not flawless, it's unacceptable. And unfortunately, that led to me over polishing documents, emails. There was an actual fear of even making
mm,
small mistakes,
mm,
actual fear there. And there was a lot of difficulty in delegating things or asking for help. And the biggest one, I think, was equating mistakes with personal failure. The impact was cumulative, were longer hours, they were constant vigilance, and I had no off switch.
Mm.
So, we know a lot of people, especially early in their careers, you're like, I'm going to be perfect, and perfectionism is going to raise my standards.
mm.
I feel like it's very important here to mention that trying to be perfect and perfection is just trying to get to perfectionism. It didn't raise my standards. It just made them unachievable and unsustainable.
Absolutely. And I dare say, Zainab, you've probably said what a lot of people on the call are thinking and probably currently experiencing too.
Mm.
Yeah, so I really appreciate your insight on that one there. Penny, from a clinical and organizational
Mm.
lens, why
Yeah.
does perfectionism stick so hard for high achievers in the first 5 years of their career? And why do you think it's so prevalent early on?
Well, as Zainab said, like we recruit for it, right? Like perfectionism is often, greatly high achievers, and our systems do perpetuate that. I think what's really interesting is I've done a lot of work with senior associates, people in professional services organizations that are typically perfectionistic. And it's really interesting once you get a little bit further along your career, because, of course, and as Zainab beautifully explained, when you are really working in that perfectionistic mindset, you really only ever give yourself two outcomes. You have one of two, and the one is perfect, 100%. The other is failure. And there's nothing in between that for you, which is impossible for anybody. And if you play that out through the lens of a couple of years, so for the first couple of years, that might work for you. You might be, you might work really, really hard. You might, burn the candle, you apply yourself all the time. But perfectionism does not lend itself ultimately to delegation or leadership. Um, it's very self-limiting. And so I've done a lot of work in my career with people who get to that point and actually they find they can't, or they find that they are wildly successful. They never say no to a client. And I have genuinely worked with lawyers who are working 20 hours a day because that, and with families and children who they never see. Now, this is unsustainable. That cannot work. And so ultimately over time, that needs some sort of elastic. It is really helpful. And if you are someone on the call who is in that mindset, just to perhaps be able to think to yourself, is thinking about it like this helpful? Can just be the first little drip feed around giving yourself opportunity to think about this a little bit more broadly. Because ultimately, over time, you very rarely will find senior leaders, exceptional leaders who have, well, everyone's made mistakes. Let's be very clear. And that doesn't mean you're a failure and it doesn't mean you're terrible. In fact, I am the biggest fan of a mistake. I've made a gazillion, I've made whoppers. And I can tell you, you do not learn from your successes. You learn from where you've fallen flat. And I encourage you, perhaps, if you're early in career, next you have um, a skip level manager meeting, ask your manager, ask them what the mistake is that they've learned the most about themselves from. I am a really big fan of putting mistakes out on the table. Let's all learn and understand from each other's, because no one has made none. Like, I think we need to normalize this very, very clearly. But if you are someone who is in that black and white mindset, um, I really encourage you early on in your career to perhaps develop some skills that are going to allow you a little bit more self-compassion, a little bit more leeway, and also a little bit around self-validation, not only being validated by, um, you know, your billables, your, 100% whatever the external validation is, also looking for what that internal validation is, because that's also going to stand you in excellent stead for the longevity of your career.
That's really well said, Penny. I think that goes a long way to shattering the illusion of the
Yeah.
benefits of perfectionism and the importance of doing so. So I really appreciate the wise words on that one. Um, Zainab, you talked a little bit about your experience before early on and the big focus on perfectionism often resulting in, lots of overtime hours, that sense of feeling like you're just not up to the task and you need to prove yourself. How did you, or what helped you shift from going from flawless to this is good enough, I'm happy to submit this, I'm happy for this to be my new standard? What worked for you?
Yeah, I think, look, first of all, I want to call out that this shift happened very gradually. So I don't want anyone over here listening because, like, I'm going to leave this webinar and it's just going to, I have made that shift. But yes, very gradually, not at once. A few things definitely helped. Exposure to different environments and different people. I've talked about, my career pathway looked different. I made a few shifts. So moving into the inclusion and well-being space especially really showed me that impact comes from iteration and consistency, not perfection, right? That was like ranging really important from me. Also, reframing quality. I started asking and I started realizing that it's more important to ask, is this fit for purpose? Instead of being like, is this flawless? Is this perfect? It's like, is this fit for perfect? Of course. And of course, feedback loops. I cannot stress that enough. Seeing that early imperfect work often led to better outcomes than late polished work. That was so important for me. So, how I continue to protect that today, I definitely just keep on remembering all three of these things, and I'm just like, I define what is going to be done before I start. And I consciously stop at good enough for purpose. That's very important for me. I remind myself polish is infinite. It can keep going on and on and on and on. Time is not. So, just really prioritizing impact over presentation.
Absolutely. And I think we talked about before of polish being a muscle, and it sounds like what you've done really well, Zainab, is work on that muscle of shifting from flawless to getting the job done, and this is good enough. But like you said, like building muscle, that takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And what I really drew out of that is the expectations you set, not only for yourself, but also for the people working around you, of how to create that environment for you to work on that muscle. So yeah, very, very interesting to hear your perspective on it, Zainab. Penny, do you have any other strategies that might help early in careers to help recalibrate these standards, but doing so without feeling like they need to drop performance or achieve less than they're currently achieving?
Look, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's such a consistent theme coming through. I guess my response to that would be around getting good clarity up front around what is the expectation here, getting good at confirming that, like just running it by. Here's what I heard. Here's what I think you need from me. Am I right? Like getting good at that confirmation and minimizing the ambiguity, I think is a really important piece. In that, to the point that Zainab made before as well, I think, when we look at what does good look like, of course, flexible working is fantastic in many ways. I often feel for early in careers, it can be more challenging, particularly if you're working remotely the majority of the time, to get a good understanding about what good looks like. That's very hard to pick up if you aren't surrounded and sort of have that osmosis around the way we do things around here. What is good enough? Of course, it can be done, but I feel as though hearing and seeing things around you, I still think is really important in understanding a lot of the more subtle, underrated elements of work and skills in the workplace. So I'm a really big fan of that as well. But I think I'm just going to come. So I think the clarity is really important. But I think, and I know we're going to talk about it, Jack, so I might really park it is around the feedback is the next piece.
Absolutely. And that's a great starting point, Penny, because look, feedback is the third pillar that we are going to discuss today. And I know for me, someone early in career, feedback is a difficult thing to navigate early on because it does feel like feedback is a criticism, because you come in thinking, I need to hit that perfectionism. I need to be able to prove myself, overcome that imposter syndrome. So feedback is certainly a challenge I feel early in careers do need to adapt to and need to pivot to pretty quickly. And I think upon reflection, we know that in education and when you're at university and school, feedback is very summative and final. It's often a mark or a grade or a very finite or very distinct piece of information. But when you move into the corporate workspace, it's very iterative, it's very developmental. You're talking about skills and qualities rather than a specific black and white answer. And we know that the problem with early in careers is often you hear that constructive criticism as a verdict rather than a growth signal, and you take it on as a criticism. And that can often lead to either avoiding asking for feedback, which we're hearing from both of you guys today is a really key factor in helping you to overcome some of the keys and signs for burnout. We also know that it can lead to over polishing before sharing. Like you've mentioned, Zainab, spending a lot of time on a task when maybe it's not needed and that's not what's expected from your managers, or even taking it personally, where small critiques can really trigger that self-doubt and stress, much like you talked to earlier on, Penny, in the psychological impact. So Zainab, for you in education, we know feedback was a grade, it was a mark, and it was very final and definitive. But in corporate, it's meant to be a growth signal and developmental sign. How did you experience feedback early in your career? Did you experience the same thing? And how does that sit with you now? How do you now experience feedback?
Yeah, no, it's so interesting that, now that you pointed out, it's like, so you're like, yes, of course, it's glaringly obvious. But of course, when you're there at that time early in your career, that's so true. I feel like you're coming out of uni and that's the experience. And it was the experience for me, I experience feedback as very infrequent. First of all, high
Mm,
stakes, extremely high
mm,
stakes, and often delivered after the fact. So,
mm,
Jack, great call out. As you said, it felt like early in my career, feedback was a judgment. It wasn't a tool. That which now I realize it is, and one of the most important tools there is, honestly. So yeah, it just felt like a judgment, not a tool. And because of that, I either I avoided it or I really over prepared to prevent it because I didn't want feedback because in my mind exactly I was also another thing I was just like feedback always is negative because you're just like early in your careers you're like silence is golden. That's also this misconception sometimes you have early in your career. So yeah, that's how I experienced it. But now thankfully you realize and you see that it's part of the process, not the outcome. It's something you should seek early and you should seek often. And it is a way to, very important to mention, a way to reduce, not increase risk.
mm,
So yeah,
mm.
it's very important. And so the biggest shift for me for going from early in my career to mid in my career and where I am today is that feedback is information. It's not my identity. It's no longer and should have never been about, am I good enough? But it always should be about how can this be better?
Absolutely. And Zainab, you mentioned the journey from sort of early in your career to now. Do you think that your way of approaching feedback, asking for feedback and receiving it will further change over time as you continue to move through your career?
Oh, 100%. Like the one thing I'm sure of any sort of, I think your career, professional development, even career, it's like, and one thing that is consistent is change, right? So 100%, I feel like at the moment, I'm like, I'm in a good space on how I receive and give feedback, but I'm always on the lookout for how to improve it, how to make it better. I previously just mentioned about exposure to different environments and different people. And everyone in their career, you'll see it's like who you're working with, where you're working, what part of your career is. Feedback is going to look different for you. But yeah, it's very important to remember that it is just information on how to get better.
Awesome. Thank you, Zainab. Penny, why do you think that our sensitivity to feedback increases the risk for burnout among earlier careers compared to, say, in the middle or late stage of your career?
Yeah, look, I think it's such an interesting question. And I think for many, people come out of school and have been high achievers, worked really well, might have done really well at uni, gotten a great job. So we're oftentimes big fish in small ponds by the time we enter the workplace. And then all of a sudden, um, particularly if you're in a, employer of choice organization, you are no longer a big fish. You are the smallest fish again. And you know what? You're also in with other very high performers. So where you've been outstanding perhaps before, wow, you might just be sort of in that mid-average range. So that can be very challenging. I think the other thing around feedback too, linking it back to that perfectionistic personality style, is a tendency within that style to really focus on the negative. Perfectionistic personality styles tend to look at the things that are wrong, the 0.05% that's not quite right. So, how that translates to feedback is I might have a review with a leader. They might tell me some things that are great, but you know where I'm going to be spending all my time and energy afterwards? I'm focusing on that two sentences that were the things that weren't quite right that I need to focus on. So I think there's a couple of elements to this. I think there's definitely an individual piece and a real um, bravery to challenge. Am I really spending equal balance on the positive feedback that I'm getting? Or am I just pushing that aside as like, oh yeah, of course? I really challenge people early in careers to take notice of that, absorb it, celebrate it as equally as you are the constructive feedback. And I think I hear a lot from both leaders and early in careers about feedback, and it's such an interesting and challenging space because, I think that oftentimes the leaders that early in careers have got maybe didn't have the same great focus on balance in their careers. People in my generation burnt themselves out regularly, did all-nighters all the time, not great boundaries. And so you often have this slight rubbing up against one another around this. And so I think we need to be mindful of that as well. I think it's important to be asking for feedback. But the gold in feedback, I think, as Zainab has really spoken to, is around fundamentally, do you believe that this is provided to you in the interest of your development? Is it around something else? But if you genuinely have a relationship with your manager where you believe that this is set up for your growth, for your career, for your good, then that's gold. I mean, I think that, and we need to be courageous enough to be able to take that on, self-reflect, maybe come back and have another discussion about it if you want to, or you feel like you need to. But I think that's it is really important. You can choose to do with feedback as you like, but to seek it out is really important.
Absolutely. And to put you on the spot, Penny, have you had a time where you've wanted to seek feedback from somebody, but maybe been a little bit apprehensive or anxious about doing so? And what was your experience with that?
Absolutely. So my supervisor for my psych when I was early in career and I was in a grad role, and my psych supervisor was actually my manager, and I was terrified of her. She was really quite intimidating, and all of my feedback really was pretty negative. I actually, with reflection, am incredibly grateful for much of the discipline that she taught me, because I am not of a perfectionistic personality style, so really needed that support. But actually, in seeking, so there was very little positive feedback, but I just had to come to terms with the fact that, for the most part, that was probably a good signal. Now, is that great? No. But I did seek feedback from her around a couple of things, and she was very generous and insightful. But that had to come from me. If I'd waited, it wouldn't have happened. And it took a bit of courage. But if that is something that you are looking to do, there are some really simple things around it. Set an agenda. Ask about what you are seeking to get out of it. Be specific about how they can support you in where you want to get to. So I think there are some things that I could have done differently, but that I think set up for really good success there.
Awesome. Thanks, Penny. Zainab, if we've heard a lot about today, the shift in the transition from over polishing and the perfectionism as a learned behavior to getting the job done, to setting expectations, to communicating clearly, receiving feedback. Do you have an experiment that maybe you've run or somebody could run to test this or give it a go or try it out so it feels like it's maybe not such a big mountain to climb for?
Yeah. I think this is one, I think this could be a really good one for everyone. I don't call it this, it's been called that. This is what I remember it as. Let me rephrase that. I think the 70% share rule. When something feels 70% about ready, share it. Share it. I understand people might not, might be scared of taking it to their direct manager or supervisor. So whoever you're comfortable with, share it with. If you can share it with your manager, great. But if you can share it with a colleague, share it with a peer, and ask one focused question about it. Am I on the right track, or is this the level of detail you're after? Why do I think everyone should run this experiment? Definitely, no matter what field of work they're in, because I feel like this really works, and it short circuits the over polishing, and it reduces the uncertainty early, and then you go back into your work feeling a lot more confident. And you basically build comfort with visibility. So you're not asking for a full-on critique. You're asking for directional input. So yeah, I feel like yes, this if there's one experiment anyone should take away, it should be share it at 70%. Share it with someone. Get that directional input.
I love that. I love that. I know for me early in career, that would be certainly be a challenge to adjust that percentage, which would be closer to 90 or 100% now. So that's definitely a takeaway for me. Zainab, is there an example where you've maybe used that in your career and you've looked back on it with hindsight and realized that I'm really glad that I did that? That was a really positive shift and change for me.
No, yeah, absolutely, Jack. This is exactly why I mentioned this, because I was someone exactly as you said. Even I was first of all not sharing at all, waiting till the work was absolutely complete. And then, as you said, when I realized, I was like maybe going towards more of the 98, 99% mark. So yeah, just realizing, slowly realizing that, not leaving enough time and then coming back gradually and sharing my work, whether it be a report, whether it be a contract I'm reviewing, whatever it is, and just sharing it with my manager or sharing it with the peer, because I mentioned that before as well, because I'm conscious that some people might be very much like, oh, I don't want to take to my manager, because they might in their head be thinking that they don't want it to seem like I don't know what I'm doing. And I absolutely want to stress someone who's been there many, many times. They won't. I promise you, getting that directional input before, whether it's any kind of work you're doing, it's going to be great. And whenever I've done that, it's been great. It's also helped me sometimes just reaffirm the way I'm going, which is, of course, great. And you move forward with confidence. And if you're on the wrong path or the wrong way of doing it, you want to get that clarity before. So there's been so many examples throughout my career where I've just been working on something really important, and I've just realized that, best of my intentions, but going about it the wrong way. It's so important to just get that feedback and get that clarity and just share it with someone. And then you're right, you feel so much confident and feeling better going on, that now when I am actually going to get to 100%, my finished product is going to be exactly what we've talked about, and you just feel so much confident and better about your work. So yeah, it's been great for me.
I think it's a really great reflection, Zainab. And I know that for me and probably for a lot on the call as well, often the anxiety of asking for the feedback or the help or the confirmation or the support is more intimidating than actually asking for it
Absolutely.
itself.
Yeah.
So it's really comforting to hear that when you did, have the courage to take that step and ask those questions and change the way of working for you, there's been some really good benefits.
Thanks, Zach.
Now, we are going to shift to some questions from the chat, if that's okay with you, Zainab and Penny. And I might start with Penny, this one for you. This is from Laurie. It's interesting to hear about the transition between university and the workplace and how shocking it can be to see the huge difference between the two. What's one learning that's drilled into us at uni that you recommend we unlearn when coming into the workplace?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think Zainab's touched on it, and I think there's a couple of things. I think around that almost unending polishing that can go on at university, and oftentimes, with high word limits. Wow, we're often, very flowery, oftentimes as well in the way that we use language. I think there's a real art in transitioning more to using your time and energy as very limited resources in the workplace. There'll be some on the call who are in workplaces where, time is managed as a resource, but I think having a mindset around putting some structure around the amount of time that goes into something, and being efficient in the way that I'm expressing myself, being efficient and effective in the way that I'm communicating, I think is actually a really important transition there.
Awesome. Thanks, Penny. And Zainab, any thoughts from you regarding that transition from university to the workforce, which you know it is quite a big jump?
No, yeah, look, I feel like Penny covered it really well, but yeah, exactly from what I mentioned before as well. I think it's just being aware, to put it very simply, that it's going to be different. I think that
Mm.
that's a very
Mm.
important thing that you don't really think about when you're leaving uni, that the workplace is going to be different. And Jack, you touched upon it as well, right? Like the first 6 months of working, you're like, oh, this is a whole new life. So I think for anyone who's just entering the workforce, things will be different, and don't let that confuse and scare you. It will be a bit confusing and scaring, of course. We're not all fearless there, but it's all right to be a little confused and be a little scared, because yeah, you're starting this brand new part of your life. So I think just expecting that things will be different and just being like, yep, it's going to be a little confusing, it's going to be a little scary, and that's okay. It will get better. I will learn.
To get comfortable
Yeah.
being a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Penny, another question for you that's come through from the chat here, from Isabel. I'm really lucky to have a great manager who's really good at providing timely feedback per each task that I do, but
Right.
struggles to give broader feedback around my soft skills, things like how I'm fitting in with the team, etc., or things that are normal to feel unsure of as a first rotation graduate. I'd love to see how you would recommend I go about seeking and clarifying this sort of very specific feedback.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I really love that you're curious around those aspects as well, because they're really important qualities to success in the workplace. Um, I wonder around your sort of more formal performance processes, if they maybe have those in there. If not, there's nothing wrong. Oh, sorry. With asking specific information. Sorry, my lights have gone off in the room. Specific information or an agenda item around these, recognizing that these are really important, and you want to develop them. So some feedback would be really helpful. Now, I think with those sorts of things too, we need to be, you'd really want your leader to be able to give examples that can illustrate the point that they're making around how they assess you in those sorts of areas. So perhaps giving some time to your leader so that they can, they're not just pulling examples from last week. I think we really want to be able to give your leader some time to think those things through. And if you find that you don't have success there, ask others. There'll be those around you. You might work in a structure that is more agile. And so you might have others in your structure who can give you some of that feedback in an informal capacity. So if that doesn't work, I'd certainly look to peers. I'd look to others. I'd look to maybe other stakeholders that you might work with to be able to give you that feedback.
That's really great insight, Penny. And I think you've done a good job of answering Isabel, but also Lana's question that came through about what feedback questions can you start with. I think you addressed that well to say, come in with an agenda, think about what you want to talk about, what are the goals you want to achieve, and give your manager some time to be able to prepare some examples for that. You also touched on asking peers and colleagues for advice as well. And Patrick submitted a question along kind of that line of thinking. Is we've spoken a bit about feedback from managers, but what about sharing some of your experiences from getting feedback from peers? Zainab, I might throw to you for this one. So seeking feedback from somebody who's maybe equivalent to you in your sort of development of your career, or maybe in a different team to you, how would you go about that, or how have you gone about that before?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that that's been asked, and I just like to go back to my 70% experiment there, and where I just touched upon there. A lot of my feedback, I'll be very honest with you, I've got some great feedback throughout my career from managers, but if I were to tell you, I feel like I've gotten better feedback from peers. Because I feel like there's a level of comfort. Of course, there's this, you're a bit intimidated, of course, from your seniors, your managers, absolutely, especially in early in careers. With peers, I felt like I was more comfortable. And, as I talked about that 70% share rule, I was more comfortable going to my peers first, especially if someone's, you've joined somewhere and someone's been at that role for a longer time, or you might just feel like, they've done the kind of work that you're doing more. Just going to them and asking, like, how would you do it? It's just getting, even just finding out alternative ways on doing things, especially when you're early in your careers, it can be really great, and more experience, more exposure. So just talking about that, sharing work. And I also really wanted to touch upon, Penny mentioned at the start of the session on imposter syndrome. And I think when you get feedback from your peers and just chat about how you're doing, even just not just feedback, but just chatting to your peers and just talking to them and trying to build those relationships with them on how you're doing, it really helps with your imposter syndrome as well. Because once you get feedback from your manager or someone much more senior than you, you're always going to see that as coming from a senior or from your manager's place. But when you talk to your peers, they might share some of their challenges and experiences that they're going through when they, give you feedback or share how it's going. And that really helps with that imposter syndrome as well, because you realize, oh, they went through when I went through, because, as Penny mentioned, imposter syndrome is often you just feeling it in isolation, thinking like, I'm the only one that's messed up. This has never happened to anyone. I always laugh about this. Every mistake that I made early in my career, I always thought, I am the only person to ever make this mistake in my life ever. It has never happened to anyone. And that's so funny to think about now, right? Like, of course, I wasn't the only one to ever make a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. And I think when you have that relationship with your peers and you go to them for feedback or just, just for an information exchange, even you learn that, and that's so important.
Absolutely. It normalizes the experience for you and it helps you understand that you're not alone, which could be a big factor in a lot of this early in career. Penny, we've probably got one more question here today, and then we'll do a bit of a wrap up. But this question is from Sasha, and it says, do you have any tips on internalizing or challenging feedback that you don't agree with?
Ooh, wow.
Loaded one to finish.
It's a great question. I would probably, to Zainab's point, I would probably look to a trusted peer to get their perspective on that feedback and frame it carefully, like framing it around, I've got some feedback that I'm not quite sure what to do with. I'm really open to if others are seeing it, but I'd really like to explore this with you. Can you please give me your honest perspective on? Because also, it's not unusual for us to be providing or to be perceived in a way that is not aligned with our intentions as well. It happens all the time in the workplace. So sometimes people might give feedback around things that you don't see in yourself. It might be a little bit of a blind spot, and we all have blind spots as well. So I think being curious is really important, even though you might not have liked what you heard, and I would actually look to get that validated by someone else. Now, your colleague, peer, others might say, wow, I'm really not seeing that. And I'm really interested that that's the feedback that you've got. And then you can be more curious, perhaps, and ask your leaders for other information around that, maybe seek input from other people. But I'd look to validate it, but with suspended judgment and curiosity.
Awesome. Thank you, Penny. Good finish for a very challenging question. Now, with everything we've discussed today, we know that ambiguity, perfectionism, and feedback, which was what we've discussed, in elevator pitch style for you, Penny, and for Zainab, what would you tell your younger self in order to set yourself up for a sustainable career? And I might start with you, Zainab.
I would say sustainable performance isn't about doing less. It's about doing things in a way that you can, what matters is in a way you can keep doing them.
Mm.
So consistency. Yeah.
Awesome.
That would be mine.
Love that.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Penny?
And not dissimilar. Be intentional. Start the way you mean to proceed. Be good around the things that fill your cup, that are, that are restorative for you. Know what they are. I think it's gold to find a really good purpose. What are the things that you like about work? Where are your, I was talking to the grad leader at CBA, and she was really interesting around the grads that do really, really well are the ones that find a purpose connection. They find a thing or a product with the customers that they really resonate with. Find your thing that is a strong purpose. And if I reflect back, I think networking is really important too. Keep those connections up, invest in those, they will always come back and reap fantastic rewards.
Awesome, very wise words. Two very insightful, elevated rides I've just had there. So thank you both for your thoughts. I want to give a big thank you to you, Penny, and for you, Zainab, as well, for joining us today. And thank you for everyone who's joined online today as well. As you can see in the chat, Pat's dropped a quick feedback form, which takes less than a minute, and it really genuinely shapes what we do. That's how we got the 3 pillars from today, and we generated the content that we did. So I really appreciate your feedback. Until next time, we thank you all for your attendance today. If you have any further questions, please reach out and let us know. But a big thank you, Penny, and a big thank you, Zainab, for joining today.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jack.
Thanks, everyone.